Did you know that embracing change can lead to more growth in your life than anything else? Want to know more? I'm on top of it. The John Top of It podcast with John Meisberg, connecting you with all things interesting and helpful. Welcome to episode number 3, where we're going to be talking about learning to embrace change in your life. Now, I know, change can be scary, whether it's starting a new job, moving to a different city, or ending a relationship. But change can also be a good thing. We just need to learn to embrace it instead of fear it. My guest today is Nathan Ashby, who is no stranger to embracing change. Over the course of his life, he's traveled the world, eventually relocating to the United States. He's had to start all over with forming relationships and working in many different industries, finding where he fits in. In this episode, you'll hear his story on how he learned to embrace the many changes in his life. You'll also learn some tactics on how to become more resilient so you can bounce back from the changes in your life stronger than ever before. Enjoy. So Nathan, I read that in 2006 that you moved from your native country of England to Hawaii.
You know, I had the opportunity. If someone comes to you and is like, hey, do you want to live in England or do you want to live in Hawaii? And you have the opportunity to do it, I'm going to go to Hawaii. And I did that because I looked at where I was going with my life and I wasn't super happy in that direction. I was going to go to school to study photography, right? And don't get me wrong, I love photography. It's been a passion of mine for my whole life. I mean, I worked on cruise ships for 2 years as a photographer, but ever since I was a kid, travel has been one of the most important aspects for me. You know, when I was 15, I had the opportunity through a company called World Challenge to travel to British Guyana. You know, there's a team of 12 to 13 of us. We all had to raise £3,000 through fundraising efforts and et cetera, to go to British Guyana for a month and hike around and travel and learn about the culture and go. We went to Kaijia Falls, which is the biggest single drop waterfall in the world and all sorts. So, you know, we were hiking through the jungle with 60, 70 pound packs at 15 and walking around with a film camera. So travel has been a big aspect of my life, and the thought of staying in England or moving to Hawaii was a no-brainer for me. So I left and moved.
So it's more so about getting to explore a new place. Because I think there's definitely a grass is greener mentality to that, in the sense that I know people in America that would kill to live in England.
Sure.
Right?
But I also didn't fit into the culture in England. Like my background as a child was, I was born into a fairly lower middle class. I had a very strange upbringing. My mother is a clairvoyant and my father was a computer scientist, a Kabbalah teacher, an astrologer. You name it, he did it.
How did they meet?
My mother was a yoga instructor. She just decided to go to England because she felt like she needed to. And then she met my father. And then within 1 year, they were married.
Huh.
So, yeah, it was very, very quick.
Quite a couple.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. So, you know, I went to a private school. I was very lucky. My parents couldn't pay for it, but my uncle, who was a stockbroker at the time, graciously did. So, as you can imagine, a person with my childhood going to a private school where everyone's parents are doctors and lawyers and all that. And it's like, oh, your mum's a psychic. And I'm like, yes, my mother's a psychic. It was tough. I was a very introverted child.
What kind of questions would
questions would be like, well, why aren't you rich? I was like, well, because this is what my parents do. It's like, well, if your mother can see the future, why can't she get the lottery numbers and win all that money? It's like, well, that's ethical reasons and various other things. So those are the kind of things I got. So I kept to myself. I programmed things with my dad. Me and my father ran a computer business when I was a kid, building custom computers for people. We would program Lego Mindstorms and do all that kind of stuff. And I would help my mother cook on the weekends because she was big into that. So I'd always be like tasting things, salting, doing all sorts of stuff, which is how I led. When I moved to Hawaii, I worked on a coffee and macadamia nut farm for like 4 or 5 months. And I did not enjoy it too much.
What did you do?
Tend to the coffee trees, cut things down, clean up the landscape, treat trees. And it was a fairly large farm. It was a solid 10 acres.
It sounds sweaty.
Yeah, a little bit. But we're higher up. We were in Captain Cook, so we were higher in the mountains, so it was pretty cool. It was really weird. We had like mini tornadoes that would roll through every once in a while. It was kind of strange. But it was a great place and I loved it, but it wasn't for me. So I actually went down to the local hotel, which was 20 minutes down the road. It was called the Sheraton Keho Bay Resort and Spa. Literally went to the HR person and they gave me a book, looked through the book, and there was a job for a pantry chef. And I was like, yeah, I grew up creating food with my mother and tasting things. I always enjoyed it. Well, I'll give that a try. So I met with the executive chef and Sai Hashimoto. And he was like, well, do you have experience? Like, well, I cooked when I was a kid. And I was like, okay, well, like read me through a recipe. So the first recipe that came to my mind was my mother's shepherd's pie recipe. So I walked through him all the stages of cooking it, from start to finish. And he was like, okay, cool, you can start. So I just started as a pantry chef. Didn't know anything, didn't have any knives,
You just needed to know that one recipe.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. And,
it's too bad other jobs don't work that way.
They can. It really, interviews all about being personable.
That's true. And if they like you...
Right. You have to have some basis of knowledge to get through, but you can learn buzzwords and various other things and get through an interview. Like there's plenty of people in this world that get jobs that they are not qualified for. And it really is about making a personal connection and going forward.
Name dropping shepherd's pie.
Shepherd's pie is fantastic, man. Super easy to make.
Yeah. So let's take a step back before we get ahead of ourselves. So we've talked about like why you made the move because you wanted a change. Mm-hmm. You wanted to see what it was like in the States. Was that a hard transition for you to make? Was it pretty seamless for you to go from living in one country to another because the culture is not that different? Or is there a lot of differences that were hard on you?
Well, Hawaii specifically is a very different culture than the rest of the mainland US.
I've heard people describe Hawaii and Alaska as a DLC.
Like a game DLC? Yeah, it's just an add-on.
It's just an add-on to America, right? So it's like kind of foreign still, but we own it kind of thing. Anyway.
Well, that whole history about Hawaii is an interesting one. Hawaii is a very different place. And I lived there for 4 years and it took me a solid year and a half, 2 years to really adapt. Mm-hmm. Because if you come from a Western mentality, it's really hard to, when you say, hey, I'll meet you at 2:00. And it's like, cool, we'll see you there at 2. You show up at 2:00 at the beach and no one shows up until 4. And you're like, well, we said 2:00. And like, sorry, bro. Like the surf was really good out in Ponkehe. And like, oh, okay. Well, let me know next time.
So that's Hawaii time.
So like getting used to that mentality of like, because you say it's 2:00 doesn't mean it's going to be 2:00. Always anticipate add an hour or two. So it's this whole mentality change that you have to have. And Hawaii has a huge brain drain problem. Because there's only like 4 industries out there: construction, hospitality. Hospitality tourism is where they make all the money. Education, and a couple other things, but there's not a lot out there.
So brain drain, you mean people leave?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
To explore other industries and other places.
Yeah, they move to the mainland. They go to school in the mainland and
I see.
Never come back. I had a friend when I was working in the hotel. She had lived there her whole life. She had never left the islands ever because she was afraid. She was afraid she would never come back. And it's that kind of fear that holds us back in our lives. She was afraid that if she left the islands and found somewhere else to live, even for a short period of time, she wouldn't come back to the islands because it would change her to the point where she wouldn't want to. And that fear holds a lot of people back. Like a lot of Americans don't have passports. But travel is all about learning, right? Learning how other people live, how other people go about their day-to-day lives and culture. And if we don't bring that into our lives, we end up with the problem that we are in America right now, where everyone is very kind of closed-minded and they only see their own tiny bubble. They don't see what else is going on in the world. And if you don't see those kind of things, you don't travel, and experience stuff, it really limits you and how far you can go in your life and the political climate and all sorts. So...
And I know you're not clairvoyant, but that was actually the answer to my next question, which was...
Nailed it.
I was going to say, what did you learn from your experience of moving from one country to another? And it sounds like you're looking to expand your mind and understand how other cultures live so you can broaden your horizons.
Yeah, and it's totally true. If you go to Machu Picchu and see the ancient civilization, Egypt, all of these places, and you're like, wow, having these things to keep in your mind and give you perspective, that's a big aspect. When people say like, oh, I've been traveling, you're like, okay, great, where you've been? Well, we went up to Canada or we went to like the Caribbean or Mexico. I'm like, those are great places, but there's other continents in the world. Go to Africa, go to Australia, get out of your comfort zone, go see other things. Go take 2 weeks and, you don't need to go backpacking across Europe and live a hostel life.
Yeah.
But go to Italy. go to Rome and go to the Vatican and see. The most amazing thing is when you're in the Vatican walking around, you look up and you see, your mind knows that what you're looking at is flat, but it looks like a 3D image. And you go into the Sistine Chapel and you see the iconic God's hand touching and everything. You're like, wow, those are the moments that really help give you perspective in your lives. You know, going into these fantastic Italian restaurants and seeing how people interact more with their hands, and they're very, you know, passionate about everything they do. Where in America, it's completely different. So again, perspective is key within this.
There's a term that's used for people after they graduate high school, before they start college, they take a year off and travel abroad.
Gap year.
Yeah. And I've always been jealous of people who were allowed to do that. My parents were not able to afford to help me do that, and I didn't have the resources at the time. But I really would have loved to take that time, because you hear all these stories about people who come back and they say that they've been changed in a positive way from seeing how other people live their lives. And I think it helps them appreciate what they have when they see people who don't have the things that they have. I think that's one way. Maybe if you visit like a third world country kind of situation, but maybe you also go to somewhere else and you see how other people appreciate things you don't appreciate, and it changes your perspective, like the Italian example you were given earlier.
Yeah, gap years are very important things within, you know, European culture especially, and it goes deeper than just travel. It gives you a break. You know, one of the issues that I have with American education system is that you start going to school when you're 3 or 4, and you don't stop until your mid-20s. You know, if you continue a higher education, that is a long time to be in an education cycle. And you get out and then you go straight into the workforce. You never have time to take a break, relax, see the world, and just enjoy things before you get back into it and allow your mind just to kind of expand and relax a little bit.
It's a symptom of capitalism.
Okay, it is. And higher education isn't for everybody. I think that's another aspect of it too. Like, I'm not the type of person where I enjoy school, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a practical person. And I think too many people in the States and Europe as well are forced into a higher education when it's not right for them, and they come out in debt, unhappy, and with, I mean, for some people, a worthless degree, which didn't help them at all in their lives. I mean, they definitely learned a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's worthless in the sense that they learned about something they were interested in. And
Right.
I think in that sense, education is always a good thing. But that when you're putting thousands and thousands of dollars into something and expecting a return on that investment financially, just looking at it through that specific lens, a lot of like art history majors are going to be disappointed.
Right. It's a very niche market.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
It is, because it's an important thing, and history is an important thing. You know, we are in the position we are today is because we don't understand our past and keep it relevant in our lives.
Why do you think that other countries are able to practice a form of capitalism, but still take the time to relax and explore and travel and not be so gung-ho from school to work? And why do you think that America is such a workaholic culture, and you go to other countries that still have a form of capitalism, but they seem to not be that way?
No, I mean, if you think about it, in the grand scheme of the world, America hasn't been around for that long. And they're playing a kind of a catch-up game. They don't have the history that Europe does, and we've had a lot longer at this. So it's also, another factor is that it's a lot easier to get around Europe than it is in America. America doesn't have a very good, you know, transportation system. You have to drive everywhere. So that's also a limiting factor. You know, myself as a English person, if I still lived in England, if I wanted to, I was like, hey, let's go take a day trip to Prague. Like, cool. It might cost you like 40 euros on Ryanair. Not the best airline, but you're traveling like 2 hours, and it's like, you don't really care. The workaholic culture comes in because that's just how the capitalist mentality has moved. And we're kind of on the par with Japan in terms of that kind of workaholic lifestyle. It just takes one person in an office building who isn't efficient, and it's like, well, I'm going to get everything done, and they take way too long, and then it shames everyone else because like, well, no, it's Friday. I'm going to go home and spend time with my family. And this other guy spends an extra 4 hours at the office, and then he's like, well, I did this, and it's like, and you shame that person. And it's an unfortunate culture that's been reinforced.
So, you know, we talked about what you've learned from traveling from England to Hawaii. And then you were telling me about how you had this role where you were working in coffee fields, which I imagine I know you personally, you love coffee. So I mean, there must have been some interesting elements to have this elements of the job that allowed you to interact with the product on such an intimate level, you know?
Sure.
I think that's kind of neat to see like where it's coming from and understand the supply chain process and all of that.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. And, you know, working on what they call some of the best coffee in the world. At the time, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Kona coffees was like $22 a pound. And I was like, oh, wow, this stuff is really expensive. And I got to learn into the why of that and learn about, you know, the Peabody and the roasting process and, you know, how coffee's developed and everything else. And it was a very interesting thing.
So why wasn't it for you? What made you get over it? Was it just too labor intensive or?
It didn't stimulate me mentally enough. Like I needed more challenge in my life instead of just manual labor.
Maybe you just needed more coffee.
Maybe I just needed more coffee. Who knows?
Okay, so you found this hotel nearby and you applied, your interview went swimmingly. You knew about shepherd's pie.
Love it.
And so now you are starting as
just a pantry cook.
Pantry cook in a hotel. And this is the beginning of your journey. And it's the first career change in your life, or?
Honestly, it was one of the first. My first job was like 16, honestly, selling Christmas trees. That was my first job.
All right.
So it was just like, hey, this is a Christmas tree. Oh, cool. Cash. I'll wrap it up for you. Take it to your car. Like that was my first job. So this was kind of my first real job.
Sure.
As I didn't know what I was doing. I was literally living in a foreign country. I knew 2 people and I was just doing by myself. And I was still very introverted at this point in my life, like very introverted. Wasn't good at making friends. There was a stark transition point. So I went to private school for 14 years and then I moved into it. I was like, I got to get out. So I went to a state college, or what you call high school, we call college. And I became the cool guy because I had a beard. I was like super metal and I had a giant beard and I was just known as the beard guy. So it was a very strange transition for me because like people were like, do you know the beard guy? And I'd be like, who's that? It's like, it's you. I was like, oh, I'm cool. This is interesting.
I wish the bar was still that low to be cool.
I know, right? Just have a beard. I'd be really good at that. But that was a stark contrast for me. It's honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to move to Hawaii, because giving yourself a fresh start, you get to create your own personality without any baggage. Right. No one knows you. You can create a new you based upon what you've learned in your life. I knew that I didn't want to be that person. So I changed myself and became this person. And then I did that again moving to Hawaii. And I did that again when I moved to Vermont. And then when I moved back to England, was like this whole process just gives you a chance to reinvent yourself and be a better version of who you want to be.
Totally. So tell me about this role. You were working as a pantry cook.
Pantry cook. I was making cheese boards and making chocolate dipped strawberries and salads. It was pretty boring, but I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I moved very quickly in the ranks there. I moved my way up to catering. I was doing all the luau's with a catering chef, and then moved to the line and was doing all the fine dining stuff, and then ended up running the catering side because of some incidents that happened.
Did you guys do like the fully roasted pigs with like the...
Sometimes, not every once in a while. It's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah.
And also sourcing the pigs is not the easiest. But yeah, we did all that stuff. It was interesting. And at that time, like I was working 2 jobs. So I was working the hotel at night and I was working at a breakfast joint during the day. And
so you're getting a lot of hospitality experience.
Yeah. I mean, the whole time I lived there for 4 years and I ran my own photography business. I ran my own computer business, building custom computers for people. This is back in 2007 when it was still Vista had just come out.
Ew.
Yeah, it was a terrible.
So you had 2 official jobs and 2 hustles.
Yeah, I was working a lot. I bought a house out there when I was 19 before the credit crunch, and it was a lot of stuff going on. I was like fully into being an insane adult working 20 hours a day.
Nice.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So where do you think your entrepreneur type of spirit comes from? Just like feeling like you have to survive?
Yeah, I've always had the hustle mentality.
Yeah.
Just because I just do what I have to do.
Were your parents like that?
No, not particularly. I mean, yes and no.
Did you have siblings?
Nope, only child.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like to understand how people become the way that they are.
I'm just a practical individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just do what I have to do.
Yeah.
And usually as individuals, our best selves come out when we're put under pressure. That forces us into situations which we're uncomfortable with, and therefore we adapt and change. So we have learning lessons.
So photography is fun.
Well, photography can be fun.
Can be fun.
It depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
But yes, it is a lot of fun.
So when is it not fun?
when you have to work with certain individuals where it doesn't make it fun.
The client can ruin it.
The client can ruin it, but also I did wedding photography for a number of years. I never had any issues with wedding photography because it's all about managing your clients and understanding them as people, helping them through the situations. Like most people have never been married before. You as a wedding photographer, you've done this, 50, 60 times. You're there to guide them. You're there with them through the whole day when most people aren't. So it's your job to anticipate things, make sure that all the timelines are running correctly to buffer periods so people don't get stressed out and don't get into those situations where they turn into what they call bridezillas. Those don't really exist in my world. It's all about knowing people and predicting situations.
You can manage the Zilla.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. To an extent.
So getting back to the catering topic.
Yes.
So you're working several different hospitality roles and you're moving up through the ranks of that. Where did that path take you within that industry? I think on LinkedIn, I saw that you had eventually became an executive chef.
Yeah, that took a little bit.
And you had worked in the hospitality industry for at least 3 or 4 years or so, or?
By that point, about 5 years. 4 or 5 years. But there was a period of time before I became an executive chef because I traveled the world on cruise ships for 2 years as a photographer. I worked my way up in the ranks doing that. So I was photo lab manager and also assistant manager on cruise ships too.
So you were all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, literally all over the world.
A lot of change.
A lot of change.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're comfortable with change.
Comfortable with change.
Yes.
I always follow the mentality of that change is never bad.
There's always a positive side to it. That like, even if you think it's bad in the moment, that there's a way to grow from it and learn from it.
Right. And it may take a little bit to do that, but it's looking at things as a big picture. Like learning how to separate yourself from a situation and take a step back is huge because it gives you a outlook that you wouldn't have before. So when situations arise and people come to me for advice, I always find the positive first. You always look for the positive aspects, even though they may be negative. There's always a way to look at it as a positive.
Or the silver lining.
Yeah.
Like at least it's not this. At least it's not that.
Like, yes, this situation sucked, but hey, you learned this from it. You know now that you don't want that in your life, that you don't need that. And this is how you're going to move forward. It's always a positive. It's just changing your lens and finding that. And that just comes through experience, and travel is a big part of that.
So you've made a lot of changes in your life, and I was wondering if you still fear change, and you were saying you don't anymore, but that at some point in your life you initially did, and it's because you've made a lot of big moves and you are uprooting yourself. You are totally going to a different place where you have to start all over, new friends and family, new career opportunities, having to find a place to live. Like there's a lot that goes into
it's a lot of logistics.
Getting your phone number changed. I don't know. Like there's a lot of things that you have to do. It's a pain, and it can be scary because maybe in your brain you start to ruminate on thoughts like, what if this is a mistake? What if I would have been better off where I was? And,
right. But if you're not being scared about doing something, it's probably not good for you. You have to do things which make you a little bit afraid. Otherwise, you're not pushing yourself in life.
That's why I went skydiving.
Right?
Twice.
I still haven't done it. It's on my list of things to do. I just haven't got around to it. I've done bungee jumping.
I think that if you feel fear, then it can be a sign that there is a huge opportunity there for growth.
Sure.
But not always. Like, for example, if we play Russian roulette, I feel fear, but there's not an opportunity for growth from that, I don't think. Unless you survive. I mean, if you survive and you realize you should never do something this stupid again.
Right. But, as with everything in life, everyone experiences things differently. There are people in this world who do professional motorcycle stuff and they're adrenaline junkies and they need that fix. That's how they live their lives. And that's fine. It's not for everybody. So challenges come in different forms. And what challenges me is different from what challenges you. But the consistent thing is that if you're not doing something which scares you even just a little bit, you're not pushing yourself in life. If you're not going to it for a job interview and trying to change your existence for the better, then all you're doing is being stagnant. And that's how we get into just bad cycles.
I totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, I'll pose this question to you. So think of one point which changed you, but it changed you as a person. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad, but we all have paths, right? What fate is, but everything's diverging paths on different basis. I mean, you can go into quantum theory and realities and everything that every second of every day we're making choices which change our existence and everything else. But like for me personally, I was a very introverted person as a child, like I mentioned earlier. It wasn't until I worked on cruise ships that I learned how to talk to people, because I was forced into a situation where I had to sell things. I had to talk to customers. I had to create these interactions to make money. Otherwise, I would have failed. You know, one of the worst shoots we had to do on cruise ships was restaurant shoots. And I don't know if you've ever been on a cruise ship, but the ones I worked on, my first ship was Ventura, and it was 3,000 passengers per turn. So we had to do a restaurant shoot 3 days a week because it was a 7-day cruise, and 2 sittings because there was always 2 sittings for the restaurants. So we would have 5 photographers go in, and we'd have a shoot minimum. It's generally you have to get at least 100 shots. And the 3 shoots, the first one was individual headshots, second one was couples, and then the third one was table, right? And this was all to just sell as many photos as possible. And it is one of the hardest things to do. You have to psych yourself up mentally so much, because imagine if you're sitting at a table eating your dinner and you've got a photographer that comes up to you and is like, "Hi guys, how you doing? Madam, you're looking beautiful tonight. If you just want to look towards me and just give me a nice smile, tonight we're doing individual headshots. We're going to make you look 10 years younger. Oh, that's perfect. All right, turn this way. Boom, boom, boom." And you do 8 people and you have at least 2 people that tell you to F off. And your response has to be, "No problem, sir. Have a great night," and move on to the next table or move on to the next person.
Not take it personally.
Right. And you have to learn not to take all this stuff super personally and just like mentally block it out and move forward. And that's how I learned how to be an extrovert. And I've definitely moved from probably an 80% introvert into like a 60% extrovert.
Well, do you still get drained from the experience?
Oh, yeah.
Because my
Immensely.
understanding is like you're a true introvert functioning in an extroverted role, in the sense that you've like learned how to adapt, but that my understanding is that true extroverts get energy from those experiences and they become more rejuvenated from them. Like I consider myself to be an extrovert, and just this social interaction, like when we're done with this podcast episode, I'm probably going to feel like super great. Like I sucked something out of you. Like, yeah, I feel awesome. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a balance. Like personally, like the way I recharge is I'm just happy just like being quiet for like 2 hours and no one talking to me. Like that's how I recharge.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do enjoy social interactions a lot more now.
Okay.
Like back when I was 17 or 18, I was not a social person. Like I was pretty awkward when it comes to, I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't understand any of those social cues or anything like that. And it wasn't until I worked on cruise ships where I was forced.
Yeah.
And this is the key word, forced to deal with that.
I don't remember the name of the person who did this, but it was like a famous military guy who would sink the ships after they dock on land. All the soldiers would get off the boats and run into land to fight, and he would sink them so they couldn't get back on the boats and leave. So they had no out. They had no way to escape.
Oh, got it.
And knowing that they had to fight made them fight better than they had ever fought before. And it was a strategy, a military strategy. And I think it's kind of similar to putting yourself in situations to do something you're not good at where you don't have a choice. All of a sudden you're like, welp, it's sink or swim.
Pretty much.
Right? Like you just gotta do it. I remember when I was in my 20s, I think I took a job working for AT&T, going door to door, trying to reduce people's like cable bill.
It's pretty soul destroying.
It was awful. But I got really, really good talking to people in that role. And I remember starting out not being that great. Like I was okay. But I remember by the time it was over, I just felt like, you're right. Like in my mind, I had to do it. And, you know, you'd ring that doorbell and you'd have all this anxiety waiting for them to show up. And every part inside of you wants to run away and just not do this anymore. And then, you know, they open that door and you start talking and you realize, hey, it wasn't so bad. Push your way through it. You feel like, anyway, full circle. If you feel like you have to do something, it can definitely help you
learn and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely took a couple shots of vodka before we did most of these shoots to give us Dutch courage, but I mean, whatever helps.
I mean, you're on a cruise. There's probably a lot of that.
It didn't help that the crew bar was right below the restaurant. So I was like, do all the shoots, drop off our cards, go downstairs, drink a little bit, and then go back up. So, you know.
I feel like if I worked in the cruise industry, I don't know if I'd ever want to leave. That sounds like a lot of fun.
It's a tough industry.
It is?
Oh yeah, it's a really tough industry. The biggest problem is that, and I just actually had a friend of mine who I worked with as a photographer, He just got off working on cruise ships and they now work on land, but he doesn't have a ton of transferable skills. Like going into this job market now, he was an entertainment officer. Like he went photography, went back onto land and then worked as an ENT officer. Those are not super transferable skills.
Yeah.
Like trying to convince someone's like, hey, I'm going to do this. And I was like, so what do you do? It's like, well, I was an entertainment officer. I'm like, oh, okay. So you're good with people? Like, yeah. Okay, great. Well, you can do this. So it's a rough industry. And most people that do it for life are engineers or deck officers because that's the career that they've chosen. But if you work in the commercial department or anything like that, it can be kind of a rough industry.
Transferable skills. So speaking of transferable skills, you pivoted into the corporate world after several years working in the hospitality industry.
Oh, yeah.
So
variety is the spice of life.
When you were starting out in the corporate world, did you feel like things that you had learned in your past were transferable? And what parts do you feel like helped you get started in making that shift?
You know, my time from cruise ships definitely taught me a lot about politics, which is a big thing in corporate. It really is about who you know, learning different departments, understanding key players. You know, it's an unfortunate thing that you have to sometimes play the game. So that was a big part of it, learning how to talk to people and get to places, but also provide value. And that was a big thing. Yeah, the corporate world's a rough one, as I'm sure you know.
Well, you worked as a chef for many years. What were some of the skills and experience that you gained in being a chef that you feel like transferred over into maybe not the types of things you do now, but the things you did when you entered into the corporate world? First, I think I need to understand like what you actually did and what you're doing now.
Well, the hospitality industry is a brutal industry.
Yeah.
It is the industry of misfits and people who don't fit into society. And it's tough for many reasons.
Is that because they work in back of house?
It goes both ways.
They're just like, oh, no one has to see you.
No, it's front of house people the same way. They just put a good facade on.
Oh, okay.
They're just as terrible as people in the back house. They're better at hiding it. You have to understand, like, the work is brutal.
Yeah.
Like the hours suck. You don't have a life. You're constantly under pressure. You work 16-hour days and your whole day is based upon like you got to get everything done as efficiently, as fast as possible. To the highest degree, you try and achieve perfection, but really perfection is never achievable at all because you're always trying to do better. So it's a constant daily challenging process. And it leads to serious drug abuse and alcohol abuse, and holding a relationship is rough, really rough. And it's a very insular community. Everyone does things with each other. You know, you work 16 hours and then you go out drinking, you sleep 3 hours and you're back into the same place working with the same people. And it's tough, but you know, I learned a lot in how to work in high pressure environments, which is highly transferable into corporate world. Being adaptable to ever-changing situations and creative problem solving. You know, when you reach to like executive chef level, depending on what kind of chef you are, it can go in multiple directions. I was always a lead by example person. So I'd always be, you know, working on the line, but also having to deal with everything that comes up. Like, hey, the dishwasher didn't show up. Cool. All right. Well, we got to find a solution to that situation, or, you know, that and the nth degree of things that can go wrong. Dealing with customers, like, hey, that person doesn't like what they put in their food, even though it was put to the highest standard. As a person, they didn't like that element within it. That's not your fault. They just didn't like it. Dealing with those situations, like, oh, no problem, sorry about that. Here, you know, dealing with that customer interaction, like, please come back, let's give you another chance. It just goes on and on. The whole business world with that is insane. But it's one of the biggest industries in the world. Like, everyone has to eat. So, you know, it's a rough one.
So I think that for people who are thinking about making a change in their life, it's helpful to think about the things they've done in their past and how can they leverage some of the skills and experience they've acquired in their previous experiences in their life and see how those things can be transferable towards the things they want to do. Like, just because you're going from one thing to something completely different doesn't mean that you don't already have ways to at least have some kind of experience or skills to get started in it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, transferable skills. Like, just because you haven't done it in that environment before doesn't mean you can't do it. And I'm always the type of person that thrives under pressure. And it's really, again, putting yourself into those situations to do it. Like, you can learn as much as you want in school or online or whatever, but if you don't actually do it in a practical setting, you'll never have it. So you have to just put yourself into those situations where you do it in a practical way.
I've always found that I've been more motivated to learn something when I put myself into a situation where I feel like I have to, or else I'm going to fail. Like, for example, if you're going to apply for a job in IT and you need to know some program in order to be successful in the role. For me, I would be more motivated to learn that program after I've gotten the job than before.
No, I mean, that's actually not a bad thing.
Right.
As long as you can understand enough of it to get through an interview, you can pick things up pretty quickly afterwards. Shepherd's pie. That's exactly my point. You know, when people come to me, like one of the issues I've had all through my life is that no one has ever wanted to cook for me. It's like, oh, you are a chef and you're executive. I'm like, yes, but that doesn't mean you can't cook for me. He's like, well, you're going to judge it. I'm like, it's not judging, it's constructive criticism. But the way I'm going to show you and teach you is going to help you. And you just need to let go of this whole, I'm going to fail, because you will fail, but that's okay. And it's like you were talking about earlier, you know, doing your door-to-door sales. The more you do something, the better you become and the more confident. And cooking is exactly like that. The more you do it, the more you learn and the more confidence you gain. And then you can start experimenting and adapting and changing. But you start with those core recipes and you just do it over and over and again. The first 1 to 7 are probably going to suck, but that's okay. You gotta just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and you will get better in this understanding. But at the same time, if you have a person like me in the mix where I can go, hey, try it this way, you can cut a lot of those steps out. Like take, for example, I had someone ask me recently, like, my chicken always comes out burnt and dry. I'm like, no, that's a really sucky thing. No one wants to eat dry chicken. It's horrendous. Try it this way, where instead of just like cooking it in a pan, you just color it in the pan and then bake it in the oven the rest of the way, right? That way you don't have just indirect contact on one side. It's getting all around heat going on, convection, right? So it cooks more evenly and you can temperature probe it to exactly 165 and keep all that moisture on the inside. Like, oh, that's a great idea. I'm like, yes, I know, try it. And now all the chicken just comes out fine. So it's just like reading books. You can cut a lot of the learning process out of the way.
When you said earlier, constructive criticism, the first thing I thought is that in all of the computer jobs that I've had in my life, the managers that I've had, they always try to use the term opportunity for improvement.
Oh, yes. Corporate phrases.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they take the sting out of it. They're trying to use the flip side of the coin. But no, I think that's all really good advice you're talking about. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I think we've kind of covered it, and maybe I'll edit this in somewhere, but it's just kind of surrounding around the concept of fear. Mm-hmm. I think that fear is what holds a lot of people back from making any change that they know that they should. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes what happens is something will happen in their life where they're forced to make a change, and that's tough.
Right.
You know, so sometimes they just wait until their parents die or their significant other leaves them or they get laid off at the company or some kind of major thing that forces them to, it pushes them out of the nest and then they have to do something or they feel like they have to do something. And I was thinking, why do you think people fear change? But it seems like the answer is kind of obvious, that it's uncomfortable. But I was looking online and I found a few different scientific reasons and I thought I'd share it with you and maybe we could talk about it. But one was that we fear that we might lose what's associated with that change, that our aversion to loss can make logic fly out the window. So for example, thinking, you lose your job and then because you've lost your job, now you fear that you're going to lose something that's associated to losing the job, like the money or the security or whatever comes with it. Or if you lose like your significant other, all of a sudden this aversion to loss, it makes you start to think irrationally. And now you're like, no one's ever going to love me again.
Right.
You go down this spiral.
Right.
And that's definitely one component too that people have to overcome when it comes to fear and dealing with change.
I think when it comes to this kind of stuff is that a lot of people don't make these choices because it's easier not to. Like, it's easy to be in a job that you don't like. It's easy to be in an unhappy relationship.
I just read a quote from Tim Ferriss.
Oh yeah, I love Tim Ferriss.
And he said, people would rather be unhappy than uncertain.
Oh yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Change is hard.
Yeah.
It's never easy.
Uncertainty.
And so I was thinking, right. But to grow as an individual, you need that in your life.
I think I was reading something about how there's been neuroscience research that's been done that shows that uncertainty registers as an error in our brain.
Mm-hmm. At the genetic level.
Maybe that part of your brain lights up, the same part. That's why it's so painful, or to have it unresolved. Like you all of a sudden just feel like I need to make this certain. I need to remedy this somehow in my life.
Well, it's always easy to justify. Like, we as humans are really good at justifying things. Like being in a toxic relationship. It's like, well, people can change, and I don't have the money right now. Like, I can't get out. Like, there's no way to get out. There's always a way. You can always find a way, or there's always someone that can help you. There are ways to do things. I had a personally major change in my life. I'm 31, and I really didn't. I became a better person after 29. I had some major life stuff happen to me in the space of 1 week. I had 3 major life changes. I decided to end the relationship with my ex-girlfriend of 2 years, and it was a pretty toxic relationship. This was like 3 days before Christmas. My father passed away on Christmas Day, 2015.
Wow.
And then I got home a week later and I lost my job because they couldn't afford to pay me to be away for a month because I had to be back in England. So I had 3 major life things happen in the space of 1 week. And it took me 2 years to realize that I was grieving about my father's passing.
I bet you just got real busy, huh?
Yep.
To distract yourself.
I dived into my work. I came back to Minneapolis after being away, and I got a job as an executive chef running a few restaurants, and I dived into my work.
Classic avoidance.
And, after a period of time, I got out of that and I ended up being the head of IT technology for a multinational corporation running a gaming arena over in the Mall America. And I had a moment. I was living by myself and I came home from work and I had just this stark realization that I wasn't happy. All I was doing was working, coming home, and I was so tired and drained that I had no energy for anything. I didn't have any creative energy. I would just play video games to just zone out because I just had nothing. And then I would just repeat that cycle. And I literally just decided one day that I was going to leave. I was like, I'm out. Like, this isn't happy. And why am I perpetuating this cycle of unhappiness? Like, it's not working.
What was the breaking point?
I just realized I wasn't happy. Like, this whole being in Minneapolis, doing what I was doing, living this life wasn't bringing me happiness. I really kind of like dived into it and was like, okay, is it what I'm doing? Yes, to an extent. Is it where I'm living? I was like, yeah, it's kind of where I'm living. Like, this being here isn't giving me the opportunities I need to grow as a person. So, and you'll perhaps understand this, but I was going to go to 250 Above and Beyond's landmark show at the Gorge.
In Seattle, or near Seattle.
Yeah. And so I had that on my calendar. And I was like, okay, that's in September. I'm going to leave Minneapolis in September. And just the way everything started aligning was perfect. So my lease was coming up 2 weeks beforehand. And, everything just kind of worked out. So I was like, I'm going to sell everything. I quit my job, literally sold everything I had in a garage sale. And if I couldn't fit it in my car, it wasn't coming with me. And I left some stuff in my friend's garage. And I drove cross country from Minneapolis all the way to Seattle. I just decided I didn't want to live there anymore. And I was going to move forward in my life. I had no goal apart from getting to Seattle. After that, it was just pure whatever happens, happens.
Well, you have had previous experience in your life where you did this from England to Hawaii. So you were able to look at that and see that you were successful with doing that. So maybe you've built up the confidence that you should probably have a good chance that you could do this again.
Right.
Yeah.
And I understand that a lot of people who would listen to this like, well, I can't do that because I have a family and all these things. Like, I get it. But it's not about that specific situation. It's about the act of making that change. In like, I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I need to make a change which is going to bring me into a better place in my life. That could be finding a better work-life balance, by, hey, look, this job is taking up 60-hour week and it's not allowing me to spend time with my family or do this.
There's always something.
There's always something you can do. And unfortunately, the current world that we live in is a lot about consumerism and materialism. So it drives this mentality of, well, I've got this house and it's got 3 bedrooms, but I don't have enough space. So I need to get a bigger house, which has more space. Then you fill that house up with more things and you don't have enough space. Then it's just like the cycle keeps repeating itself and you don't need all of that stuff. So you can scale back, like you can scale back your finances to give you more opportunities to do more things with your family. So there's always an option.
I've heard it referred to as the hedonic treadmill, that hedonism is like the mentality of living for pleasure, and that people get on this hedonic treadmill where every time they get a salary increase, they get a lifestyle increase.
Right.
And it's this never ending chase for more and more.
Right.
And back to Tim Ferriss, his whole 4-hour work week thing was, how can you get by with less? It's kind of a Buddhist mentality too. It's like, try to be more of a minimalist and maintain a lifestyle that is sufficient down here at the lower where you're happy, And even if you earn more, then use that so that you can have the freedom to control your time. So you can have more experiences and do the things that you want to do and feel more in control and less like a slave to some kind of company.
Like for me personally, I would take that money and funnel it into going to places, like just traveling. But if you look at, and I like the way that things are changing now. Take, for example, like Marie Kondo. It's like asking you a question, does this bring you joy in your life? Yes or no? And if you have to answer no or maybe, you probably don't need that item.
The biggest problem that I have with her philosophy is that my fiance went around her house asking that question and she threw exactly nothing out. I'm like, there's no way that literally everything in here brings you joy. And she's like, yeah, it does.
I mean, it's also, joy can become in many things. Like it might give you joy once a year, but does that balance out?
Dude, it's like that fondue maker in the attic. It's like, why bring it out at parties once a year? It's I want to have it because you never know.
It's also why I don't have like Christmas stuff or anything like that. So you use it once a year and I'm just like, it's perpetuating a cycle, which I don't enjoy. Like having a small Christmas tree, like my parents have had the same fake Christmas tree since before I was born. That thing is like 35 years old and it's still going strong, but it's like the only constant. But like there's certain things you just don't need in your life.
This is coming from a prior Christmas tree seller.
Right? Like take for example Alton Brown. Alton Brown is one of my favorite chefs out there, and he wouldn't call himself a chef. When I first started cooking, my first cookbook I ever got was a book by Harold McGee on food science. It's called On Food and Cooking, and it's all just food science. And it interested me so much. Like if you want to learn why eggs do certain things at certain temperatures, the way the albumin develops and, coagulates and everything else, understanding that, it was super exciting for me. And Alton Brown's the same kind of mentality, but he has this aversion to any cooking apparatus which only has one use. Like it's pointless. Like why would you buy a waffle maker or anything like that? Like it has one purpose.
I have a banana slicer. It's
pointless.
It's
why?
Shaped,
you have a knife. Don't do it.
It's shaped like a banana.
No, it's stupid.
And it has little wedges inside of it. And then when you lay it over the banana, you get a lot of
But you could just use a knife and cut it like a real person.
Can I tell you why I bought it?
Okay.
The Amazon reviews were hilarious. It was like $1 too. It's just kind of like
it takes up space in the drawer.
Yeah, you're right. It's just like a gag gift type of thing. But if you ever get a chance, you should look up banana slicer and read the reviews on Amazon.
Oh, Amazon reviews. They are fantastic. The sugar-free gummy bears are my favorite.
Don't those cause diarrhea?
Oh yeah.
No.
Great for pranking people. It's a little evil, but I'm okay with that.
Oh my God. Okay, so getting back on track, you're talking about some of the reasons why people fear change. Another reason that I read is that people genuinely believe, often on an unconscious level, that when we've been doing something a particular way for some time, it must be a good way to do things. And then the longer you've been doing it that way, the better it is. So people's mentality tends to be that if you're giving up something that's old, that's therefore a good thing, and you're giving it up for something new, that's therefore not as good.
I think that's just silly, honestly.
I think that maybe a good example of that is when a significant other breaks up with you and you didn't want it to happen.
Mm-hmm. And you try and justify it in your mind, like, why did this happen? And you keep going through the cycle.
Well, all your friends say, dude, there's plenty of fish in the sea. You'll meet someone else. You're going to be happy again. Time will heal all, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking to yourself, this is the person that I selected. This was the good thing.
Right.
And whatever is out there, like, I don't want the new, not as good thing.
It's a rough one. Fear is in our genetic code. At its base level, why are most people afraid of snakes? Well, in our genetic code, it's told us that snakes generally hurt us, so we should be afraid of them. Same thing with spiders and various other things like that. When you talk about doing skydiving, instantly people have a response to that. Why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane? It's like, well, we're pushing our boundaries, pushing our understandings. The people in the world who... the Elon Musks and all those people is like, they don't follow conventions, right? Mm-hmm. They make their own paths. And they do that because they follow uncomfortable thought patterns. They follow through with things that they think is people aren't going to approve of.
They know it's going to be a challenge, but they know it's going to be worth it.
Right. For the betterment of society, whether people agree with them or not.
Well, like with the skydiving thing, the reason that I've discovered from doing it was the same reason you like to travel, which is that it humbles you and it allows you to realize just how small you are in the grand scheme of things. Like you can know, but when you're up there and you can see the curvature of the earth, it's a very spiritual experience. It's more spiritual than you'd realize before you jump out of the plane. When you're out there and just looking around and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm this little thing.
When you hit terminal velocity and you're like, Wow, this is insane.
Yeah, there's something very spiritual, I think, about going to outer space or just being high enough to see from up there.
We're not far away from commercialized space travel. It's coming.
So you were working as a chef. You went into the corporate world. Let's talk about that first interview where you had to sell yourself to make that switch. Was it difficult to sell yourself, or basically all the reasons that you told me beforehand about the transferable skills that you gained in working on a cruise ship, skills you learned from working as a chef, all those skills prepared you for your first entry-level corporate type of role. And then from there on, you gained a lot of experience in that role that then you were able to parlay into a new role. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of it is having confidence in yourself. A lot of people don't have it's like, well, I don't know enough for that position. I'm not qualified. And it's like, just do it. Like, even if you're not super qualified, still apply. You never know what could happen.
You know what it is? It's that they read the job description, they read the role responsibility list, like the bullet point list, and they say, I can do half of this, 25% of it I can sort of do, and the other 25% I can't do. So I'm just not going to apply.
Right.
When really a lot of employers would look past that if they like you and they think you have the potential, right?
Again, I didn't go to university, and I'm very happy that I didn't, because it wasn't the right place for me. And a lot of jobs these days, relatively still have you have to have a bachelor's or 10 years experience in these things, an accumulation is it's ridiculous. But companies like Google and Apple are finally starting to remove those bachelor requirements and various other things and focus on more on experience, which I think is far more important.
They want to see what you can do. Somebody with a PhD who can't do anything is not worth anywhere near the same amount as a high school dropout who can create another Facebook or something.
Right. And in my role, for example, as a scrum master, a lot of it is experience based. It's understanding how to deal with situations. And you get that through experience, honestly. And it was interesting. So for people to understand what a scrum master is, it's part of, project management. And it's just a framework of dealing with complex situations. So my job is basically a middleman, and it has a lot to do with being a chef. I took a step back and I kind of thought about it and, had some kind of interesting lucid dreams. I was like thinking about transferable skills, like as a scrum master working in a super corporate environment, dealing with people and, dealing with stakeholders, CEOs, and then, development teams and everyone in between. How does that have to do with being an executive chef? You would think they don't have anything in crossovers, right? But they do. As a chef, executive chef, you're dealing with top to bottom. You are the middleman. You're dealing with business owners. You're dealing with customers. You're dealing with GM, all the workers from top to bottom.
Lots of stakeholders.
But yeah, within the project management world, there's the product owners and everything else.
And so you get experience with delegating as well.
Right. It's all about delegating. It's all about dealing with, high pressure situations that pop up, impediments. So it's like, hey, we didn't have a dishwasher coming today. Cool. And you start calling people. No one comes in. All right, well, I guess I'll do some dishwashing. Or, it's all about jumping in and dealing with things. Hey, we're out of this ingredient. Cool. You can use this one. Or, hey, go to the store and get that. It's all transferable skills. So trying to think of things in a bigger picture always helps. Take yourself out of the situation and look at it, a higher level plane, and you might realize some things. And so again, transferable skills. Just because you've used them in one environment which you don't think applies, it actually may do. It's all about take for example, if you go into a job and you don't know JavaScript. If you have a basic understanding of how to code and you have that mentality, it doesn't matter what language you try and learn, you can learn it quickly enough. If you put yourself into that situation where you have to work in 40 hours a week, you'll learn it pretty damn quickly. In the culinary world, you may not know how to chop a cucumber a certain way, but if you do it 1,000 times a day, I guarantee you'll become a master pretty damn quickly. And that's how the work really works.
That's how I feel about making a bed now. Because I run Airbnb out of my house. I definitely know how to corners. I can make a great bed.
So what within your life does change mean to you and adapting? What have been major points within your life that have led you to this point now? Because I know you've had some major things in your life in the past 5 years or so, but speak of some circumstances which really you had to push through, that made you afraid.
Very transformative experiences.
Yeah.
The end of my first marriage.
Okay.
That was really rough.
That's very relevant for a lot of people.
Yeah. I was with her for 7 years. And when that ended, I didn't want to kill myself. I just didn't want to exist anymore. I just was over it. And I lost faith in my judgment because I thought if someone that I thought would never do that did that, then I don't trust myself anymore. And so that was really difficult for me to overcome. But I can say that looking back on it, I think it's been about 3 years plus since that happened. It's probably the most transformative experience I've ever had in my life so far. And I've grown as a person in ways that I never would have imagined I could grow in a positive way. So, but I can really relate to a lot of the things that you've been saying, in the sense that after that first marriage imploded, I packed up my things and moved from Florida to Seattle, Washington, and said, I'm starting completely over. And I left my entire family. I left all of my friends that I built up those relationships over the year, and just decided, I'm doing this for me. This is something I want, is to be out in this area where there are a lot of opportunities to work in technology, and I'm going to make the sacrifices to do it regardless. And so it was a hard change. I think that something that I've learned is that when you're going through one hard change, you might as well compound it. It's actually a great point. I used to have 2 dogs, a corgi and a dachshund. The corgi's name was Sneakers and the dachshund name was Charlie. And Charlie was a huge troublemaker, and I loved that dog to death, but it became such a big problem that I had to rehome him. He would bite everyone really hard. And I thought that if this continues, he's going to get put down by somebody else. And so I needed to find somebody he could be rehomed with where he wouldn't have those opportunities. And I'd had him for 7 years. After I'd gone through my divorce and I was in a bad state, I was thinking, I'm already dealing with this difficult change. I'm going to do this and compound it, just not feel great for a while. And honestly, I think that is a pretty solid plan. Is to just, if you know there are things that are painful, you might as well just like get them all done in the same moment.
I mean, to talk about that point, I think the hardest thing is to let go of something that defined you for so long. Like when you're married, when you present yourself to people, you're a married couple. It's the definition of who you are. And to let go and move forward from that is not an easy thing to do.
To go from a we to a me.
Right. And kind of relearn, because when we get into relationships, there is a period of time where we transition from an individual into a couple, and you lose an aspect of yourself about who you are because you adapt to the person you're with. And when that ends, you have to relearn who you are as a person. And that is not an easy thing to do. Being alone is like, well, I used to do that. And like, oh, now I have to do it by myself. And you have to create a new friend group, and you have to, it's like, oh, I forgot I used to do that as a hobby. Oh, I love this. This is great. And you slowly relearn and become who you are as a person. And I've learned recently, not going into details, or through some people within my life that have gone through that, is that not all relationships are meant to be. Just because you married someone doesn't mean it's right long term, because what can happen is one person can change and become a different person, and the other person doesn't follow that. They stay the same. Or both people change in different ways. Right. And they move in different directions, and it's not right. It's not right for each other. When I talk about marriage, and it's something that personally I don't want in my life, it's not to say that one day it might not happen, but the way that I see marriage is it's an institution that was brought around in a time and era where lifespans were very short. And it was a necessity for lineage and bloodlines, and to transfer power and land and all sorts of assets and things like that. And now it honestly doesn't apply to a lot of the way people think and live their lives. Like, go to someone and expect them to be together for 70 years is not an easy thing to do. And, people say, well, my grandmother did it for 60 years. Like, again, very different time and era. If you look at how we live our lives now, back then, people will hold the same job for 40 years and retire in the same job. Now, you'd be lucky to find someone that has held a job for 2 years in the same location, because it's all about technology's changing so fast, and we're changing so fast as people, and how we communicate and interact with each other. It's just a hard thing to expect of people and not to mess up and fail. It's also putting pressure onto people as well. So divorce is okay. Like, it's not such a stigma anymore, which is fantastic.
I blame Disney.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, they're the reason why people think that these things are supposed to last forever. You're brainwashed your whole life to think they are supposed to last forever. But also, if you have role models in your life, like your parents or your parents' friends, and they have been together for a very long time, then you think that that is the norm, that you're supposed to. I do think it's interesting that people that come from divorced families tend to have more relationships. They tend to have shorter relationships. I think we learn a lot from modeling and we learn that our norm and what we expect and what we become, a lot of that can come from just the relationships that we have observed personally throughout our formative years.
Our core personality is pretty much defined by the age of 5.
That's scary to think about.
It is really scary to think about. And it's why, you know, certain people who rear children are really, really on top of making sure they learn in a certain style of way. They're reading from a young age. They're presented with a lot of challenging opportunities, is because that honestly presents a lot of what's going to happen in our lives.
I just got a new puppy, and they say that the most formative times in their brain is up to 24 weeks. And after that, like, it's way harder to get things in.
Yeah.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of thing. Like, and I've heard that animal rights groups hate people discussing things like that because then it discourages people from wanting to adopt a dog from a pound if they think that, like, oh, if that dog has behavioral issues, that they're a lost cause, and they don't want you to think that they're a lost cause, that there's something that you can do maybe to teach them otherwise. I think it's just more so that you're going against the grain. It's not that they can't learn. It's just that when you are very young, your brain is more plastic, right?
Right. Everything's still forming. So
more malleable. Yeah. And so information can just so smoothly get in, and it's just more challenging to get it in when you're older.
And like for me personally, I traveled every single year. I was very, very lucky that my grandparents took me and my mother and father all over the world when I was young. And so that was like really formed into my brain. So I've always been very adaptable into those kind of situations. But yeah, it is an important thing. It's just allowing ourselves to have the opportunities to push through and having people on our side to support us. And when we get afraid, and you know, this still happens to me to this day, where I'm like, I don't know if I should do this, and I just do it. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You don't get the job. Okay, well, you learn something from it, right? You'll go to this job and it's like, well, I've never interviewed for this. You know, I've never done a panel loop before. Well, if you don't do it, then you'll never know how to go into it.
Yeah, you're questioning the catastrophe.
Right. Well, if I don't prepare for the right question, what if they ask me things I don't understand? Like, well, you may not answer it, but you'll learn something from it. You'll learn what's going to happen in the future, and you'll be more prepared. So when you actually get to something that you really want, you're ready. And you're not going into it. Like, do something that scares you. They say, like, do one thing a day that scares you. No, forget that. Do one thing a month that scares you. One thing a year.
Well, you can start small.
Right. Start small. It's like when people say, don't set yourself up for failure by like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week. Nah, that is not going to happen. Once a week. Start small and work your way up. Learn coding. Okay, well, here's a coding course that's 20 hours. Cool. Let's do 2 hours a week or whatever it is. Like, just start small and work your way up. Don't set yourself up for failure.
Right. I work in learning development, and we call that breaking a larger goal into more manageable goals. It's called chunking, chunking it out into things that you feel like are not as overwhelming, that you can break into like a daily task. So that's very helpful. Back to the marriage topic. You were saying earlier, though, that sometimes people grow apart and it's okay to get divorced. And I agree with that. But what do you think people that do make it work for so long, what do you think is special about that relationship? Because I am willing to bet that most people in relationships are not growing in the same way per se. Like, usually people have different occupations. Usually people are interested in different things. I don't think the recipe for a perfect marriage is 2 people who both love exactly the same thing.
No, it's actually generally a recipe for failure.
Yeah. So from what I've heard, the recipe for a successful relationship is for both people to independently be able to fulfill their own happiness through what they're doing and then share that happiness with each other. Whereas a lot of people are codependent, and one of the main reasons they're with that other person is they're looking to them to make them happy. And that's seems to be a huge mistake.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's all about balance, right? You have to have a common ground. You have to have something that connects you. And then you have to have extremes. So take, for example, in my current relationship, we are both very independent people, which is very important. But at the same time, we love doing a lot of things together, but we don't require that. I push her in different ways, and I support her in different ways, and she does the same thing for me in different aspects. And that is very, very important. If you're not supporting and pushing your significant other, it's kind of pointless to me, because a relationship is all about moving forward together in your life.
Yeah, and I think that when somebody knows you that well, that intimately, they can help you see your blind spots. They can help bring those things to the surface and help you make those changes you need to make in your life, or they can help nudge you.
I think the biggest thing for me, and this is something that I've learned through experience, is that being in the right relationship is about having the ability to come to someone and have an honest, hard conversation without the fear of judgment or reprisal. Because as soon as you start having fear and hiding things, it's a downward spiral. So within my current line of work, within Scrum, the 3 core tenets are inspection, adaptation, and transparency. And transparency is huge within the group. Everyone should be able to call each other out. And if you can't have that relationship where I can go to my partner and it's like, I think that's a terrible idea. And instead of them going, well, screw you, then you're like, okay, why? Why do you think? And then you have an honest conversation. You can talk about, the pros and cons and everything else and have an actual thought process about it. Like, that's a huge thing. And if you don't have that, that's, to me, a sign of something that's not going to work out long term.
If you don't have honesty, you don't have anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honesty and trust are huge things. Transparency.
Another thing that I wanted to mention to you, just thinking about my own personal life and how it relates to some of the stories that you've been telling, is that when I first moved to Seattle, I was working for Microsoft as an instructional designer, and I worked for them for 3 years before they laid off my entire team and they outsourced everyone's work to another team in Romania for a tenth of the cost.
Right.
And I was really upset about that. I had just had my 3rd performance review and I had received above expectation review and a bonus and a raise in my salary, and I thought everything was great. And then you get laid off and you're like, what the heck?
Right. The bomb is dropped.
Yeah. I was really upset about that. And I ended up having to go on unemployment, and it took me about 4 or 5 months to find another role that I felt like I could get excited about. But in that time between when I was laid off and when I started the new role, I had a lot of time to reflect. I had a lot of time to analyze what I wanted out of life, to really think about what are my goals and prioritize those goals. I actually think it was kind of helpful to have that forced time out, because I don't think I would have given it to myself.
The universe works in weird and mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Just because what you are doing now you think is fantastic and is moving you forward, actually might not be. It might just be an illusion. Like for me personally, when I sold all my stuff and started traveling, I lived in my car for a solid 6 months. I was technically unemployed. I was running my own consulting business at the time, doing various things, but I was technically full-time unemployed for like a year and a half. And there was definitely a period where I was on food stamps as well. And that's no shame. Like, I can go from making 100K a year to making 8,000 a year technically. And it doesn't matter, because money is fluid. Everything in life is fluid. But if you're not moving forward in your life, it's kind of pointless. And, I ended up traveling around Seattle, backpacking the Olympics, and going through Mount Rainier and networking and meeting people. And I met my current girlfriend through completely random circumstances where I was going to a show, and I was like, hey, I'm going to the show by myself. And she's like, hey, I'm going by myself too. And we became great friends for a solid year before we even started dating. So it's if there's an encounter and you're like, oh, I really don't want to go to that, maybe push yourself and go to it. Maybe it will change your life. You don't know. I went down to California to visit my godmother in Sea Ranch down on the Pacific Highway, and the wildfires in Santa Rosa broke out the day after I got there. And I'm not the type of person to sit around to do nothing. So I called up some friends, and through a friend of a friend, I drove down to Napa and helped out with the wildfire relief effort. Ended up helping run a volunteer kitchen for 2 weeks, pumping out 36,000 plus meals for firefighters and police and evacuees, National Guard. And it was the most amazing experience of my life. And I'm so glad I was in that area to be able to help out. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't just exploring and pushing myself and not knowing where I was going next. And I wouldn't have come back up to Seattle if I hadn't got a call from a person that I had networked with randomly. It's like, hey, I've got a contract. I need you as a Scrum Master. Cool. I'll be back up there in 2 days because I'll drive up there. Like, all of these things happen because you push yourself out of your comfort zone and new opportunities arise and pushes you in a direction that you didn't even know you could go down.
And I think another big part of that is being willing to deviate from whatever plan you've set out for your life.
Right.
Because being flexible allows you to take on all these, to put it in like a World of Warcraft terminology, like you're taking on side quests that turn out to be main quests, right? Like you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I can find the time to do this thing. And then you realize, oh, I'm really glad that I did that.
Right.
It deviates from whatever master plan you had for your life, but it's a blessing in disguise that you just have to be open to.
Hey man, I was playing EverQuest when I was 13 in 99, and that was a big part of my life. So I feel the MMO love.
Okay. So Nathan, you've worked in all these different roles. You've lived in all these different places. You're no stranger to successfully adapting to change. You seem very resilient. What would you say to a listener out there that's going through difficult changes of their own and they want to become a more resilient person?
I would say take a step back, separate yourself from the situation you're in, and give yourself some perspective. That is one of the biggest things you can do for yourself. We have so much emotional attachment with a lot of things. It's very hard for us to think rationally about what's going on. And the second thing is forget about the negative. There's always going to be negative aspects in life, and it's very easy to focus on those things. If you go on to Yelp or anything online, it's really easy to talk about negative experiences, but very few people post about positive experiences. So take that aspect out and try and find all of the positive aspects in it that have happened. What are the learning moments? What can you take from this? You had a toxic relationship. It sucked. Okay, how can I move on? What can I take away from this? Well, I know that I don't want this, and this in my relationship in the future. Those things aren't going to progress me forward. So I need to start looking for aspects and characteristics in people who have the same type of music taste as me that I can go do these hobbies with, or are going to support me in these different ways. Like find the positives in everything you do, because that will push you forward.
So it's interesting that you were mentioning to not focus on the negatives. Doing some research on, there's all these like Psychology Today articles on resiliency and adapting to change. And people are talking about how the negative emotions, that they can have an indirect benefit in the sense that they propel us towards change. So for example, if you feel a lot of anger, that can motivate you to take action and change your life. I know that I can speak from experience that has happened in my life in the past. And so I've read that you can look at a negative emotions and think, what is this trying to teach me? Or if you feel really sad and you're expressing that, you're signaling to friends and family to nurture you. And so there's some benefit to negative emotions maybe, but not to ruminate in negative thoughts. Maybe that's not productive. You're not making a plan on how to move on from it.
Well, the problem is it spirals. It's a very easy thing to focus on and talk on that point there about if you're in a sad place and it's to show your friends and family to help you out. We are the 5 top people we surround ourselves with. And if you surround yourself with negative, toxic people, it's not going to help you because they're not going to help you. So it's just easy to spiral into negativity. It's always easy to find the negative in everything we do and not find the positive.
How would you recommend that a listener break that negative thought pattern if they're currently experiencing it? I've read that some people will go for a run, they'll stop what they're doing and just go get some exercise and come back to it when they have a fresh mindset. Or maybe they'll do some deep, slow breathing exercises, or they'll just do something that recenters themselves.
Yeah, meditation, exercise. Exercise is huge because it gives you a focus. It's honestly just kind of refocusing your mind.
And it also puts yourself in a diffused mode mentally where your brain can process things.
I mean, I generally go work out at night because it helps me sleep. You're getting out the rest of the energy that you had left over, and then you can sleep very soundly.
Something that you mentioned earlier, which is I think another good way to increase your resiliency, is that realizing that positive outcomes can be just as likely as a negative outcome. Like when you're evaluating, should I try this? Should I make this move? But what if it goes wrong? What if, but you're only focusing on the negatives of what could happen and not the positives of what could happen. And I've read that what some people do is they'll carry around something that reminds them of thinking positively. And anytime they get into that mindset where they're like, what if, they'll have like a pendant or like a rock or maybe a tattoo, who knows? And it reminds them to question that catastrophic thinking, to be like, well, what if it goes right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that issues in the past. Like I'm going into astrology, I'm a Virgo Leo cusp. So the way my mind works is I think of every situation possible that could happen. And it normally goes to the extreme. Like this is the worst thing that can happen. And then you work your way backwards. And I have to restrain that take, for example, going into a big interview. Generally, people fail because they put far too much pressure on themselves. And how can you take that pressure off? Well, make it so it's not as stressful. And you can do that by saying, well, if I get this job, that's great. If I don't, I don't. But I'm going to learn a lot from it, no matter what. And you just take a lot of pressure off yourself. So it's just finding solutions to deal with problems, which is some of my favorite things to do. I personally have to be challenged every day, and it's kind of a drain, but at the same time, it's fantastic. Whether that's, and this is something that we personally get along with, is that I love experimenting. It's one of my favorite things to do, like baking bread or making kombucha or like experimenting with some weird simple syrups for cold pressed coffee or stuff like that. Just trying something new. So I'm learning something every day and becoming a better person and meeting better people in my lives who I can have fantastical conversations with. It's like, I know that I could come to you as like, hey, let's talk about something metaphysical or talk about quantum theory. Like let's have an interesting discourse about it. And surrounding yourself with people like that is fantastic. It's so easy to just get bogged down in conversations that just, so how was work today? Oh, well, work was good. Yeah, cool. It's just boring.
How about that sports team?
Woo, I don't like sports. It's to me, it's kind of a waste of time.
They threw that ball, didn't they?
Egg ball.
They caught it. Go team.
Team. Yeah, not my thing.
So other strategies for increasing resiliency. I think something we mentioned earlier was that you can remind yourself that you have been successful in your past with being resilient, that you can think about past goals that you have achieved and remind yourself, kind of like how you moved from England to Hawaii successfully and integrated there, that you were able to think back and say, I did that successfully there. I should be able to make the move again from one place to another to where you are currently in Seattle. And I think you kind of leverage that success that you had. And another thing that I've read that people do is they will visualize their future success. Like they won't harp on, the what ifs, and catastrophize everything, but they'll think about, they'll just try to, isn't that what a vision board is, or a dream board? I used to remember seeing a lot of girls make them in middle and high schools. They'd put pictures of like the guys they wanted to marry and like the jobs they wanted to have. And
setting
like,
yourself up for failure.
And like the house they wanted to live in. And like they just put all pictures of all the things they wanted, like make a big collage. They would just look at it every day. And it's kind of like, that's not the philosophy behind that book, The Secret, that if you think about something long enough, the gears will start to churn and you'll start to figure out a way to make it happen. Maybe not immediately. Like $1 million isn't going to drop into your lap, but like you might start to have ideas.
Visualization is an important thing. And I have a buddy of mine who's a pilot and he's a fantastic entrepreneur. But on his desk, he has a picture of an aerobatic airplane that he wants, an extra 300. And that's one of his goals. Like he wants to be able to have access to that and fly it around. And it's not necessarily something that needs to happen, but it gives you the motivation and drive when you get into those spiral thoughts of, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is stupid. I could be doing something so much easier and having a more relaxed life. It gives you that reminder, that quick, brief reminder. It's like, no, there's something better out there that I can move towards. Like it doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. It doesn't have to be what you're striving for. It just gives you that little reminder and that push. That could be, and again, immaterial objects that has a memory associated with it as well.
Just a few more points I wanted to touch on with organically. We've already covered a lot of the points that I wanted to bring up anyway. I know that you touched on that it's useful to find the silver linings and things, to look at failures and see what kind of lessons you can learn from that. I think you were also talking about how, I think you said to distance yourself, but I read that it's helpful to emotionally distance yourself from something by looking at what you're going through from an outsider's point of view. And a good way to practice this is the next time you're on social media and you see like a friend post some negative thing, to read it from their perspective and then to read it from your perspective and to analyze, what would it be like to be in their shoes? What would it be like to be in my shoes? And to try to tease out the emotion from the situation with other people, that you can then learn how to do that in your own life when things get really hard, when you have to go through change yourself. Or another example of being able to do this would be like to watch a movie or a TV show and then to analyze what the characters are going through and how they should be thinking about their challenging situations differently, and how they should try to learn from it and grow. Like just by doing it for other people when there's no skin in the game for yourself, there's no pain or trauma, that then you're getting skilled that mental practice, and then you can apply it towards your own situation that you're going through.
It's easy to forget sometimes that there's two sides to every story. We as humans are terrible at remembering things and then explaining to people. Eyewitness testimony is absolutely pointless because we change things to fit our lens and how we see things. How I see things versus how you see things are two very different things, because it's based upon our life experiences and how we communicate with people. So when people call me for advice, which happens on a regular basis, I always like, okay, well, let's take a step back for a second. Again, it's being a major point of take yourself out of that situation and look at the big picture. How would they feel about this? Like the story that you're telling me, tell me in their perspective what happened to them. And then it gives you more of a balanced picture of what's going on. It can help you learn about what they're going through, because it's easy to forget that everyone else around you, no matter what social status they're in, they all have issues too. We're all human. It doesn't matter if you're Brad Pitt or a dishwasher at a restaurant. We're all going through stuff. We've all had life experiences that have changed us, and we're all human. So treat people, like you want to be treated yourself. It's easy to forget that kind of stuff on a regular basis.
It's easy to compare your personal truth to everyone else's facade, your behind the scenes footage to their highlight reel. Like we see all the things online that look perfect, and you're comparing it to the things that only that your insecurities, and it can make you feel like you're defective. But it's helpful to know that everyone's defective. everyone's damaged in some sort of way. Like no one's perfect, and to try and expect that of yourself or anyone else is setting yourself up for failure. I think another thing that for me that has helped to build resiliency is to put things in perspective, to kind of zoom out and say, is this really even going to matter to me in 5 years?
Right.
This is such a big deal to me right now, but I really care in the grand scheme of things. When I'm laying on my deathbed, I'm going to laugh at this. I think it just helps me control the emotional reaction that I will have to some difficult changes that are happening beyond my control.
I think it's really easy for people to hold grudges and resentment and hate and keep that on the inside and not be able to just forgive and move forward. I've known a lot of people in my life, especially in a previous relationship of mine, where they can't see past their emotion and their hate of a situation that didn't actually happen, and they can't move forward with their lives because of that. They hold on to this on the inside, and it's just some people thrive on that negativity and in turn bring everyone down with them. And sometimes it's about eliminating those toxic people from your life and finding better friends. And it's an unfortunate thing that not all friends are made for each other.
Yeah.
Some people like to live in that existence of complaining about everything and bringing everyone down to their level instead of letting you move up.
I think a lot of people are in denial that their friends are toxic in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a hard thing to admit.
Well, it's a hard thing to admit, because then you're admitting to yourself that you brought that person into your life, and therefore that like you're kind of a not good person because they were in your life too. It's like,
well, or that you just did not select them with a lot of precision.
right.
That you maybe just wanted to fulfill a social void and they were there.
Right.
So you were saying that you have to forgive in order to move on. But I feel like, and this may be not good advice, but I feel like it's hard to lie to yourself and forgive somebody when you don't believe that they deserve forgiveness. And I know that you're supposed to do it in theory so that for yourself, so that you can move on, let it go. But I don't think the brain truly forgives somebody if you don't think they deserve the forgiveness. Like you first have to actually believe that they deserve it. Like if they do something that you feel like does not deserve to be forgiven, and then you're being told, well, for the sake of your mental sanity and for the sake of you not feeling those bad vibes that you're carrying with you because of that experience you went through, you need to forgive them and let it go. But it's like, personally, I've always felt like it's kind of like lying to yourself if you don't really believe that they deserve forgiveness.
It's a process. It's not like you can go, I forgive them. Like sometimes it takes time.
Yeah. I think about like mothers where they had like someone kill their child or something, you know, and then it's like they tell them, oh, well, you're going to let that define you, or are you going to forgive them? And it's like, do they have to forgive them to move on? Or maybe they just need closure and that person needs to be
That's a fair
punished.
statement.
I don't know if forgiveness always has to happen. I could be wrong.
Let's do it in the lens of there are many situations in this world that are so minor. Just talk to them, forgive, move on. Like it's not worth it.
Most things are not worth
In the
it.
grand scheme of things, is this situation holding on to this pain and resentment that's holding you back going to help you in long term? Is it worth it? Generally, no. Obviously, there's situations which that doesn't apply, but it's finding these small little tools to help you.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's again, you can have a meditation or a crystal you can hold on to, like these little reminders that can bring you out of a spiral of I'm going to fail, I can't do this, I'm not good enough. And this little reminder of like, oh no, wait, I achieved that, because we set ourselves up for failure so often with expectations, right? Expectations are set by us. Expectations are set by our parents, our friends. Like, oh my God, I'm 25 and my friend's already a millionaire because he created this thing. It's like, well, that's fine. Like, we all have different paths. We have different goals. Like, just because he did that, like, why do you need to compare yourself to someone else? Like, you're on your own journey, create your own path, and you'll get there eventually. Just take the steps, because maybe you need to learn something to get yourself to where they are.
Or maybe you need to realize that you don't even want to be on the same path.
Right.
Right? Like, I think a lot of people compare themselves based off of really shallow metrics like money.
Right.
I hope that I can avoid that mentality for the rest of my life. I really do, because I think it's kind of toxic. It's kind of like the hedonic treadmill kind of thing. And comparing yourself to others, I feel like, can be toxic too.
It all depends on what brings value to your life. Yeah. And unfortunately, because of the capitalism and consumerism society we live in, we've kind of been taught that, oh, you need to get this car to have this status level to move to this position to get to here so you can have more money to do this. And that doesn't bring happiness and value to everybody. I know when I lived in Hawaii, no one out there really cares about money too much. And if they do, they move to the mainland. Like, most people out there are just happy having a big family, having parties and going surfing and drinking on the beach. And you know what? That's fine for some people. Live your own life, have your own enjoyment, have your own happiness.
The subjective quality of life, whatever it means to that person.
Right. What brings you to the highest state of level?
Yeah. There is a story. I don't know the name of the story. There's this guy. He fishes off a dock and catches fish. And someone comes up to him and he's like, "You're really good at that." He's like, "Have you ever thought about starting a business and making it bigger?" And he's like, "Well, why would I do that?" And he's like, "Well, then you can hire more employees. You can make more money, yada, yada." And he's like, "Why would you do that?" He's like, "So then you'd have more free time." And he's like, "Well, why would I want that?" And he's like, "Well, then you could use it to do things you want to do." And he's like, "Well, I just want to fish."
Right. Because that's your hobby.
And it's like, it was two different like ways of thinking. It's like, he's already happy doing this thing. And the other guy is just thinking like, how can I be the biggest and the best at it?
How can I leverage this to make more money?
Yeah. And getting wrapped up in that process of trying to be the biggest and the best sometimes can take all your time away from doing that thing that you love doing. That fisherman loves to fish. He'd be spending all his time doing business related things that maybe take him away from the fishing itself. So I think it's important to know what you want your life to be about and not get wrapped up in something just because other people are doing it and you get sucked into the competitive side of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me personally, like, that happened with the culinary world.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to start hating what you love. I mean, if you talk to most chefs who work at even a low level or a high level, they don't cook for themselves at home. They'll just have like McDonald's or microwave meals or whatever, because you just don't have the time, and you've been cooking all day. The last thing you want to do is cook when you get home. So like, for me personally, when I stopped cooking for a living, I was so happy because I could actually like, oh, I enjoy this again. And it's that same kind of process. And it's like, sometimes turning your hobby into something which makes you money is not a good thing.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people make that mistake.
A lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes it works for some people who like, well, I like making jewelry, and they turn into an Etsy company and now they make millions of dollars making tiny bracelets for people.
Yeah.
And which is fine, but
it can happen.
It can happen.
Well, Nathan, I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking to me about your life and helping listeners at home learn how to be more resilient and dealing with change, adapting to change. I want to give you the final word. For all the listeners that have made it this far into the interview, like, is there any like words of wisdom that you'd want to provide them, people out there that are dealing with change of their own or fear of change or struggling with just adapting to new situations? What would you want to say to those listeners out there?
I would say embrace the fear.
Yeah.
put yourself into some situations which make you uncomfortable, because you will become a better human because of it. Bottom line, embrace change, flow with it, look at the positives, and move forward with your life. If you're not happy, well, there's a reason for it. Take yourself away from that situation. Look at the big picture. What in your life is not making you happy? How can you change that? Whether it's moving into a new friend group or starting a hobby or changing your job, doing a different vocation, something like make a small change in your life for long-term goals to bring yourself to a better level as a better human.
Alrighty. Thank you for listening to the John Top of It podcast. If you want to know more about anything mentioned in this episode, visit johntopofit.blog for links and show notes. If you found this podcast interesting and helpful, please subscribe so I can automatically connect you to all things I find interesting and helpful in the future. Also, share it with your friends and family. I'd love to connect interesting and helpful info to as many of your loved ones as possible. Also, if you could leave me a positive rating and review on iTunes, I'd really appreciate it. This helps people find this podcast within a sea of other ones on iTunes. Finally, what do you need help with? Or what do you find interesting? Let me know on Twitter at JohnTopofIt. That's JohnTopofit. If you're selected, I'll use your input as inspiration for an upcoming episode. That's all for now. See you in the next episode.